Alright guys, for today's video we're going to be talking about the shenanigans that the Liberals are getting up to as they are now spending their time trying to rebrand the carbon tax from the Climate Action Incentive Payment to the Canadian Carbon Rebate, as this is an effort to rebrand an unpopular policy. Now, National Post, CTV, CBC, and even The Hill Times have written articles on this. And The Hill opens up by saying, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." And as I said in my previous video, lipstick on a pig still makes it a pig. Now, if you haven't checked out that video, I would suggest you go do that because YouTube seems to be suppressing it. I'm not sure if they don't like what I talked about in that video, but check it out if you'd like. But keeping on track with the carbon tax here, the Speaker of the House, Steve McKinnon, was just interviewed by Vassy, and she grilled him on quite a lot of this, in particular about the rebranding. And I want you to listen to what he says just before the end of this clip.
Minister, how are you going to judge and how will your government judge the success of this rebrand?
Well, first of all, we want to make sure that people are aware of the substantial sum of money they're getting in their bank account on the 16th of the month every 3 months, up to $1,800 for a family of 4. So that's very important. They also need to know that 8 out of 10 families are going to be better off under this plan than in terms of the money they would spend on fuel or other things. We want to also make sure that they know that this is going to a fight against climate change. This is a core integral part of the government's plan to reduce GHGs, something every country on Earth has pledged to do through the Paris Agreement.
So I have a lot to parse apart of what you just said, but do you essentially believe that changing the name of the rebate is going to accomplish all that you just said?
Well, let's agree on one thing. No one remembers what the last name was.
Or the couple before that as well, right? This is not the first time you've rebranded.
Is simple, and it's designed so that Canadians understand that A, they're getting more money in their pockets for the most part.
Now, if you missed what he just said there, he said, "for the most part." And then he says 8 out of 10 families get more money back than they put in. And this is kind of what the Liberals have been peddling, especially in the question period, where the Conservatives say that 60% of families are spending more due to the carbon tax, yet the Liberals are saying 8 out of 10 are actually getting back more. Now, all of this is coming from this analysis of the federal fuel charge. And if we scroll down over here to the household net costs of federal charges, this is where the Liberals are getting their information, considering only the fiscal impact, which is what the families would be putting in or being charged for the carbon tax. Yes, they would be getting more money back than what they're putting in, if only we were considering the fiscal part. However, if you go further down into the report, household net costs of the federal fuel charge, fiscal and economic impacts, it states when the economic impact is combined with the fiscal impact, the net cost increases for all households, reflecting an overall negative economic impact of the federal fuel charge. So this means when they tax the farmer on his fertilizer to grow his crops, he needs to then spend more and sell his produce for more, which then the grocer needs to pay more, which then they put that cost onto you, which is why our groceries are so high. Your gas, your heating, all of these things, those are all the economic impacts that are combined with the fiscal, which makes you pay more. And if you look at the chart here, the only time you're getting a negative back is basically in the first chart, and the rest you're losing money. That's what you're giving. And this is what the Conservatives are talking about when they say 60% of households are actually losing money. Now, Vassy continues to grill him on whether he thinks more people are going to support this now, because the polls say that that's not the case. Nobody really wants this. People want to pause on it, maybe even an indefinite one, but at least for 3 years. And he comes back again talking about Pierre Poilievre.
And is it your government's hope, though, that it changes attitudes about the policy as a whole? Because if you look at public opinion polling, the public sentiment is not on your side. Only 15%, for example, of those Canadians polled by Angus Reid in November said the tax should continue as planned with the scheduled increase that's coming April 1st. The majority of Canadians want the price on carbon dropped or momentarily for 3 years waived. A majority of Canadians say that right now. Is it your expectation that you can change that?
Well, it's hard in a country as big and as diverse as Canada with different pricing regimes. You know, BC was the first to put it in place. They have their own system. Quebec has its own system. There's a federal backstop in other provinces. But this is a big change. Climate change is a big change, though, Vashi. And what we're happy to do is come on, explain those things. But you know who won't come on this show or any other show and explain his plan? Is Pierre Poilievre. You know, he hasn't been asked the question, what about those families who are going to lose money every month?
Now, this is hilarious coming from this bozo over here saying, what about those families who are going to be losing money every month? Currently, people are doing that. They have to choose whether they're going to buy groceries, pay for rent, go to a food bank. Like, people are struggling to make ends meet, whether it's groceries or gas or heating, etc., etc. People can't pay that right now. It has nothing to do with Pierre or the Conservatives. This is all your guys' plan currently. And when Vashi hard presses him on this exactly about, well, you haven't reached any of your targets and, you know, you guys keep saying you are, he decides to come back with this little tidbit, which we'll get into afterwards.
My questions are directed to you in the government. When you say that this will help Canadians appreciate the role they're playing by paying this price on carbon in order to combat the effects of climate change, isn't it not incumbent on your government to actually tell them to what degree this specific policy will reduce emissions? You have not done it. The Auditor General's office pointed that out 3 months ago. It's actually 95% of your climate plan does not have targets attached to it. Why have you not spelled out the degree to which a carbon tax will reduce emissions?
Well, no one doubts, all the experts agree that carbon pricing is a major component of our plan. Our targets to reduce climate change and
but by how much?
To reduce greenhouse gases. And greenhouse gases are coming down. There was a report issued in December by the Environment Department that shows that we're making great progress in the fight against greenhouse gases.
With all due respect, that same Auditor General's report at the end of November, at the beginning of November rather, said that you were not on track to meet your climate targets at that point.
Yeah, well, the Environment Department begs to differ, and we are on track to reduce by 30% by 2030.
Now, I wonder why it would beg to differ when the report that he's talking about, the Departmental Results Report from the Department of Environment, was written by none other than Mr. Steven Guilbeault from the minister. Of course, this guy's report is going to say that carbon is going down. Why would we trust that? Yet, we have this independent one. As you can see here, the independent auditor's report, which is what Vashi was talking about. If you take a glance here, it says the federal government is not on track to meet the 2030 target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% below the 2005 level by 2030. While some progress has been made, we are still extremely concerned about the federal government's ability to achieve meaningful progress under the new Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. The stakes for failing to mitigate climate change grow even higher, and the window of opportunity to reduce emissions to meet the 2030 and 2050 targets are rapidly closing. So I wonder, who am I going to believe? Am I going to believe the independent auditor's report, or am I going to believe the report by Steven Guilbeault? Like, why are we playing these sorts of games, man? Now, again, after this, he starts trying to deflect again with the Conservatives, talking about how they believe this climate change needed to come into the last election. She pushes back and says, listen, I'm talking to you. You have multiple instances of farmers, indigenous people, small businesses, all taking you guys to court saying we need to get exempt from this because this carbon tax is hurting us. And you guys aren't listening. That's not a Conservative issue. That's this government's issue. There was a bill put forward by the Conservatives to put exemptions on these guys, and you guys voted against it and then gutted it in the Senate. And she keeps grilling him on this, talking about how the U.S. Doesn't believe that they should be a consumer tax on carbon and all that stuff.
We're not talking just about the Conservatives.
We're going to have a carbon price. But if we believed them then, How are we to believe them now?
But I'm pointing to the examples of Indigenous people in this country. For example, in Ontario, a group of chiefs have taken your government to court asking for an exemption from the price on carbon. Small business owners, farmers who asked for a bill that your government then voted against and had the Senate gut. I mean,
Yes.
these are not inherently conservatives. NDP leader Rachel Notley in Alberta is no longer convinced of the effectiveness of a consumer carbon tax. Wab Kinew, the NDP premier of Manitoba, also no longer convinced of the same. The U.S., nobody's accusing them of not having a climate plan. They do not believe, the ambassador of the United States has told me explicitly, that a consumer price on a consumer carbon tax is necessary to effectively mitigate
Well, that's
the
because
impact of
nothing
climate
gets
change.
through the U.S. Congress, in fairness.
They
Not-
don't believe that a
n- n-
consumer
not-
carbon tax is necessary. Are they all wrong?
Well, and you haven't pointed to all the jurisdictions, whether they be in Europe or elsewhere, who have implemented a price on carbon, who have made that in the heart of their plans to fight greenhouse gases and combat climate change. This is an important
no
program.
exemption for
This is an
grain
important
drawing that they
program,
were
and it's
hoping
so
for.
important. It's so important that the Conservatives also committed to do it in 2021.
And I take your point around that, but my examples that I provided you were
Well, how's that
not
a,
conservative.
how is that a minor point that in 2 years ago,
It's not a minor point, but
that
I'm here
Pierre
interviewing the
Poilievre-
government, not the Conservatives. As I've told you, I've challenged them on multiple instances about the lack of a climate plan. I'm not taking away from the argument you're putting forward, but that's not an excuse not to answer questions on behalf of your government.
Well, he won't come explain it here. Instead, he's in these scrums. You saw him this week, punching down at female journalists. You know, how is that okay? How is it okay for Mr. Poilievre to refuse to answer questions about his climate plan, refuse to answer specific questions about these things?
I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying I'm here to ask your government questions right now. And I'll conclude this part of our interview by asking whether or not you would consider pausing the increases on the price on carbon as long as inflation stays above the target of 2%.
Well, you know, experts came before the Agriculture Committee, for example, in the last couple of weeks, and said there's no provable link between food prices, for example, and the price on carbon. So, you know, these rebates are working. They are going into people's bank accounts on the 16th of the month, every 3 months. This is a very important feature of this plan. And those rebates, I will remind you, also go up. And so, you know, this ratio
no.
of 8 out of 10 families will continue to benefit
So no, you won't consider pausing
from the
it.
price on carbon.
So you won't consider pausing it.
No.
Now, I'd really love to know who these experts were that went in front of the Agricultural Committee to tell them there's no correlation between grocery prices and the carbon tax. You know, my guess is it was probably Stephen Guilbeault yet again saying these things. But in reality, until we get China and India, the two biggest carbon producers, on board with this, nothing is really going to change for our smaller populated places. But again, this is just my opinion. I'd love to hear from you guys what you think about it. This guy to me, kind of a bonehead, but you know, let me know in the comment section below. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.